I want to start that video, and here we go, chapter 14. Remember now, if you took 231 at PCC, you should have already covered chapters 12 and 13, which are the neural tissues, the spinal cord, spinal reflexes. And so I'm not going to really test you on them straight up, but I will tell you that there's a lot of those things that are re-mentioned in these later chapters when we talk about reflexes and so forth. So you got to know how the reflexes work, and you have to know the cells. So my advice is that you do spend some time going back and reviewing chapters 12 and 13. The adult brain, about as big as both of my fists. We actually have a human brain here in a bucket. It was a really unsuccessful student from a number of years ago, and we just I got it working. I don't know how. I really don't.
Because you're the doctor.
I know, but I just kept plugging it in and unplugging it, and it finally
Is that on your laptop now?
I'm playing my laptop, yeah.
Okay.
But here's let me just show you the problem, because you cannot read this screen. It's so light.
They're getting updated. All these are going to be your employees.
Okay.
So we got to hang in there. You can't get these anymore.
Okay. See, I can't read any of that. So
It's your memory.
I know. Well, it's my vision too. I'm really getting old. Thank you for showing up, though. I appreciate it. I just got it running.
I don't know what you call them. I'm just curious.
Oh,
They just
about 8 minutes ago.
Okay.
You got right over here.
Well, it should have been that soon.
Oh, well, thank you. Next time I'll expect it sooner.
Okay, thanks, Hal.
Thank you.
I knew you would.
Okay, so it's about 750 cc's, and you need to know that the brain is not like the brains you're going to see here in class. The brains that you see here in class have been soaked in fixative, and that makes them get stiff so that we can cut them and so that we can look at them, okay? Your brain right now is like soft jello, and if we drilled a hole in your head and laid you on your side, your brain would gradually just ooze out, just like loose, soft jello would. Now, the reason I always remember that is when I was a kid, I was a history buff, and I remember reading the story about Abraham Lincoln. And of course, Abraham Lincoln was shot in the back of the head by John Wilkes Booth, and he had a big hole in his head, and the doctors came up and looked at him and they said, "You're gonna die." They declared his wound mortal. And so they moved him across the street to a little boarding house where they had a double bed, and they were able to, he's a real tall guy, and they were able to lay him catty corner across the bed, and his wife and his son and a few people sat there with him through the night, and he died at 7 in the morning after that. And in the meantime, about half of his brain apparently had poured out on the bed. So just know that your brain is nothing like what you will see here in lab. I think a lot of students get confused by that. And if you're doing autopsies one of these days, usually we don't do autopsies of the brain. And if you do, it's like a 2-month process to do an autopsy on the brain. You've got to take the brain out, you've got to soak it for 2 months, and then you can actually look at it and figure out what's going on. So that's the story. About 97% of our neural tissue is in the brain itself. There's a few nerves that run through the rest of the body. There's the spinal cord. The average weight's about 3 pounds. Despite what you always heard, Albert Einstein's brain wasn't any bigger than anybody else's. Smart people don't have bigger brains than not so smart people. We'll just leave it at that. This is something you got to know. Okay, I'll just tell you right up front. I'm going to show you a slide here in a minute that's going to show those 6 regions of the brain. But these are the 6 regions of the brain. The spinal cord attaches down here at the bottom to the medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata is oftentimes referred to as the brain stem, and indeed the brain stem is the lowest part of the brain, other than the spinal cord. The spinal cord is just a set of nerves that's bringing the information into the brain or taking information out of the brain. Remember that afferents approaching, efferents exiting, all that good stuff. The medulla oblongata it takes care of a number of things that we don't ever think about, like our heart rate, our digestion, our breathing. How many of y'all have been sitting here thinking, oh yeah, I had that bowl of cereal this morning, I need to make my stomach work on that cereal, right? You didn't think about that. None of you thought about telling your intestine to, come on, move the food on along because my lunch is coming and I gotta have room in my stomach and so forth. We don't think about any of those. Those are called autonomic functions, automatic functions would be the way I would think of it. And most of those are handled in the medulla. Now, the way you can remember that is that if you work for the mafia and you are a hitman, the place you always want to kill people is by shooting them right in the bottom of the brain stem right there, and you put a bullet through their medulla oblongata and they are instantly dead. Because the medulla is what tells their heart to beat, it's what tells their lungs to breathe, and so forth. And you didn't think you'd learn something really useful in your future career, did you? There you have it. Just above the medulla is the pons. The pons is kind of the connection between the spinal cord and the cerebellum. Remember the cerebellum? Maybe you don't. The cerebellum is the part that controls your muscles. So all this information comes up to your brain through the spinal cord. It goes through the pons, and the pons then hooks it into the cerebellum. And indeed, the cerebellum is the part that gives you coordination. And you've seen people that are disabled that don't have good control of their cerebellum. I think I have some pictures I'll show you later of animals, like there's puppies sometimes get problems with their cerebellum, and they're just kind of all over. And a lot of people that have cerebral palsy have real problems controlling their muscles because they have problems here and with their cerebrum as well. Going on upstream from the pons, the mesencephalon is sort of the midbrain, the diencephalon, and then the two biggest parts of the brain, one, as we've already mentioned, is the cerebellum, and then the one that really allows us to be humans and have an advantage over all the other animals on Earth is the cerebrum, which is very large in us humans. So the cerebrum is the gray matter that completely covers the top of the brain. We'll talk about the different regions of it and what it does as we go on through this. So the cerebrum is the largest part. It controls all of our higher mental functions. So the cerebrum is the part that thinks for you. The cerebrum is the part that interprets your visions for you. It interprets the sounds that you're hearing and makes them make some sense. So it takes noise and turns it into words, for example. And all of that goes on up in the cerebrum. And it's important that you remember that, because whenever you're talking about a reflex, like a spinal reflex, that stuff doesn't involve your brain. You don't have to think. When the doctor hits you on the knee and stretches your patellar tendon and your leg kicks out, you didn't have to think about that to make that happen. That information never made it up to your brain until later. Then you look and say, oh wow, my leg just kicked out. But the reflex itself occurred down at the spinal cord level only. There's a right and left cerebral hemispheres, and you've probably heard people being referred to as right-brained or left-brained, and oh, they're so talented, they have such great artistic qualities, they play such great music. They're left-brained, or they're right-brained, you know? We generally, if you're right-brained or left-brained, it depends on which handed you are. If you're right-handed, you're pretty much going to be left-brained. And if you're left-handed, like I think our last 3 presidents have all been left-handed, which means they are right-brained. The layer of the brain matter on top is called the neural cortex. And we'll just go through this here. It calls it cerebral cortex. And basically that's all those little jiggle things on the top of the brain that are there to increase the surface area of the brain. The ridges are called gyri or gyruses, The depressions in between those are called sulci or sulcuses. Then there's a couple of deep grooves that really go down through the brain, and those are called fissures. And we have a big central fissure up here. We have a parietal fissure that goes kind of lateral and back that way. We'll show you pictures here in just a second. The cerebellum is the part that controls the muscles, like I said. It's the second largest part of the brain, and it helps us coordinate really repetitive movements. It's also covered with a cerebellar cortex. The surface of the cerebellum, the second largest part of the brain, is covered with cortex as well. Here's my illustration of the cerebellum in action. Watch this. I'm going to stand on one foot, okay? And I'm going to put my hands out, and I want you to just look at me, watch my arms. And what you see is that I'm wiggling around a little bit. But I can stay pretty still. And if you could look at my muscles, my muscles in my leg right now, you'd see that, remember those muscle groups we had, and one muscle group works for a while, and then it gets fatigued, and another one takes over, and then another one takes over. Well, the cerebellum is the one up here that's coordinating all of that and making that work right. Now, if I have my eyes open, I can hold myself pretty still. If I close my eyes, I probably can't. Okay? You youngsters probably could, but I'm a little older and things don't work quite as well as they used to, and I weigh too much. But anyway, so that's what your cerebellum does. It takes all the information from all of those muscles and from all of those stretch fibers. Remember those proprioceptive fibers that tell you where your joints are? And it has to process all that, and it keeps going. It keeps sending that information back and forth as quick as it can. Those are the fastest fibers that we have in our whole body, or our muscle and our sensory fibers that go to our somatic muscle system, our somatic muscle. Because that's really what gives us coordination, and that's really an important factor. Because how else could we run away from things, and how else could we kill things, and how else could we play football or whatever? All that important stuff. The diencephalon is up right underneath the cerebrum and the cerebellum. It's kind of the next one under there. It connects the cerebrum with the brainstem, and it has three divisions. Boy, this is really stupid. The right thalamus, the left thalamus, and the hypothalamus. Okay. The hypothalamus. What's the hypothalamus do? Anybody remember? It does release some hormones. The hypothalamus is kind of the main connection between the brain and the endocrine system. The pituitary gland is hooked on there too. So anyway, the thalamus is a big, here's what you need to know about the thalamus, just so you know. It's a relay center. So all this information that is sent up here from the brain stops in the thalamus, and then it connects, and then it goes on up to the cortex, so you think about it. The thalamus doesn't send everything up there. It just sends stuff that it thinks is important. Now, let me give you an example. I'll give you that later. The hypothalamus we just talked about. The hypothalamus has an important role in hormone production, in emotions, and in autonomic function. Come on in and have a seat for a minute. This is Melissa Duke. She's our lab person. Wonderful. The pituitary gland, really, I don't know if you really call it part of the brain. It's really not. It's a major endocrine gland called the master gland that kind of runs all the others. It's connected to the hypothalamus by a little stalk called the infundibulum. And it's the main interface between the nervous and the endocrine systems. The brain stem down lower, we've already mentioned it, passes information between the spinal cord, the cerebellum, and the cerebrum. And it includes 3 parts here. We've already mentioned the medulla at the bottom. The pons is the one that connects out to the 2 lobes of the cerebellum. And then the mesencephalon, which is kind of the midbrain. Mesencephalon, called the midbrain, processes sight, sound, reflexes, and helps us maintain consciousness. The cerebellum, the pons rather, is the one that connects the cerebellum to the brainstem, and it's involved in somatic. What's the difference between somatic and visceral? Remember that? Somatic is the muscle system that is under control. It's the skeletal muscles. So, to control your skeletal muscles, it's under control. You send signals down to the muscles and tell it to bend your elbow or whatever. All the muscles in your body are somatic muscles, and the somatic muscles are all controlled by the somatic nervous system. Okay? The other nervous system that we have is called the visceral motor system, or the autonomic nervous system, and that's things like your stomach. And your stomach sits there and keeps pumping away, whether you think about it or not, right? And your heart keeps beating. Not one of you has been sitting here in the last 40 minutes and said, oh my gosh, I need to cause my heart to beat, or I need to speed up my heart a little bit, or I need to slow my heart down. That's all controlled by the autonomic or the visceral motor control system. Medulla is the one I mentioned that you want to shoot through. Connects the brain to the spinal cord and controls these autonomic functions of heart rate, blood pressure, digestion, respiration, and so forth. So here's a picture. You need to know something about each of these 6 parts of the brain, and here they are. Here's the cerebrum up here. It's the part that has all these gyri and sulci. And here's the 2 main fissures that you need to know about. This one's called the lateral fissure out here, and this is called the central fissure. It comes down the middle. It's kind of vague, I think. You can't just say, oh yeah, that's exactly it, because y'all will bring me brains when we get the sheep brains out, and you'll say, now is the central fissure this one, or is it this one right behind it? Because sometimes they're not so obvious. So don't get freaked by that, okay? The cerebellum is this little guy back here in the back that coordinates all your muscles like I've been talking about. And then here's the other parts in the middle. Here's the spinal cord at the very bottom, the medulla oblongata, the pons. The pons is easy to see because it has these fibers that go back and forth across and connect to the cerebellum here. The mesencephalon, and then the diencephalon, which has the thalamus and the hypothalamus. And then it has this little thingy hanging off the bottom of it, which is called the pituitary gland. Right? Let's stop right there for a minute. 2 people have already asked me how they get the online stuff from Pearson.
Well, if you want to get the online stuff from Pearson, you have to purchase a new textbook or new lab manual. What you do is you go to Mastering Anatomy, and it'll give you a choice of register. So you click on students. I did this yesterday. So you click on students, and then you click on get registered, and then it'll ask you, do you want to register for self-study materials or do you want to join a course? We don't assign you online homework, so you're not joining the course. You are clicking on the self-study. So then it'll ask you again, do you have assigned homework? Do you have assigned assignments that you're required to do? Are you required to register for your class? No, you're not. So you click on the other one. It says no, I don't need course ID. You click on that one. Otherwise, you'll get stuck in an endless loop that's asking you for your course ID over and over and over again. And if you don't have a course ID, so you don't want that. So then once you do that, it will ask you for the code that's inside your lab manual or your textbook. And you should be able to put that in, and it'll take you to your e-text. And you'll see a sidebar with all kinds of other resources, my study area. So my recommendation is if you have a new book and a new lab manual, you have to register. register your lab manual first, because sometimes you will get stuck on the first book that you registered. And since the lab manual is going to have PhysioX and you're going to need PhysioX, if you get stuck on one or the other, you want to get stuck on the lab manual and not on the lecture book. If you already run into that, you may have to call Pearson. You'll definitely have to call Pearson to try to get it straightened out. And if they can't get it fixed for you, then let me know and we'll figure out how to work around it. But yeah, if you haven't registered your book yet, you haven't registered your lab manual yet, register your lab manual right away. If you've got a used book, a used lab manual, then what you'll need is access to PhysioX. So then you'll come to Open Lab either on Tuesday or on Saturday and let me know. I'm not going to be in the Open Labs on Friday, but on Tuesday or Saturday, let me know and I will give you a PhysioX disc, or I can put PhysioX on a flash drive for you. But I'm not going to have time to burn a bunch of PhysioX discs right away. So definitely try to get access. And then, yeah, then if you can't, then come in the Open Lab on Tuesday or Saturday, and let me know, and I can make sure that at least before the test that you guys have access.
What do you think are the best parts of the Pearson Online stuff, besides the PhysioX that they kind of got to do?
Interactive physiology is, I think, is the most useful thing. Everything else that is available, there's a histology atlas and a couple of other resources to go with your lab manual. I have those posted on RC Bio Group, which if you have not joined, or even if you have, you'll probably have to rejoin now, that it's moved into a site. But you should definitely join that right away. Go to your My PCC, you click on sites, you click on academic, and then click RC Bio Group and join that. And you'll have the PhysioX answer key, which is useful. You have the model keys. You'll have links to videos of sessions giving his lectures. So if you want to go back and check to see what he said, or make sure that you missed something or part of something, that's a useful thing. And I've got other useful items and links to those things. So yeah, I'd say the one thing that's super useful is probably interactive physiology, and that's associated with the textbook, not with the lab. So if you can get over, I may be able to get access to, I can get access to part of interactive physiology. If you don't have access to it with the immunology section, I've got a link to that posted, but I haven't been able to get a good link working for the rest of it, so the only way you can get that is like these types. Or if you share it with somebody else.
So the bio group is just like sites, and then what we have for that?
You click on academic, and then it's RC bio group. They're in alphabetical order. It's the last one, but there are only like 10 sites on there. So and then once you do that, then from now on, from then on, you can just click on sites, they will come up. There's a whole really cool section of lab stuff, lecture stuff, extra stuff. If there's something that you
I'll probably, I'll go over this stuff, go over those things with you up here on the board, probably next week. I like to give you a whole week to kind of play and get on D2L and get on Rock Creek Bio Group and try to get on the Pearson stuff and look at it and kind of see, what is valuable to you and what's not, and then we'll go over it. If there's anything that didn't make sense to you or you couldn't get into, we'll try to get it sorted next week. Okay?
You can email me from RC Bio Group, and we can post messages on RC Bio Group that I'll see. So if you're looking for something, you can, wow, I really wish there was something that just listed the difference between the autonomic and the somatic nervous system. Then, and if you can't find it on RC Bio Group, you can send me a message or send me an email saying, hey, I'm looking for something like this. Do you have anything? And I will post it for you and that's it.
Melissa Duke is listed in our class, so it's real easy in D2L to communicate with her.
although I'm terrible about checking my email email, so if you email me and you don't hear back from me within a day, then message me on our staff report, look for me on the staff directory, and yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of tough when PCC now has so many different email systems. Okay?
All right.
Thank you.
All of you guys are doing well.
I'll just tell you that most of my students tell me that she's the most valuable thing they had in A&P. Much more valuable than me, because she just has all the stuff. She has all the info, and she's been doing this about 12 or 14 years out here, and she really knows her stuff. So please know that when she gives you an answer, it is correct, and I will take it as the answer. How's that sound? All right, let's talk for just a minute about the embryological development of the brain. I don't think this is very important, to be quite honest with you, and I try not to test you on it because I don't know. I never needed to know it in my whole career, so I figured you probably won't either. I judge a lot of things like that. Maybe that's not right, but it's the way I do it. Just as a quick note, the brain starts off as a flat sheet of tissue called the ectoderm, and the ectoderm then takes and rolls itself up and forms what's called a neural tube. And that neural tube is the brain matter that's around the ventricles that run down the middle of your brain and then go all the way down the spinal cord as that little tube of water called the central canal of the spinal cord. Remember that? Little central canal that goes all the way down the spinal cord? Okay. So what happens if so as it does that, as it rolls up like that, the embryologist divided into several parts. The prosencephalon, pro is in front, meson is the middle, rhombencephalon is kind of the lower parts of the brain. Okay? This rolling up and forming this neural tube is really important, and some of you probably have heard the term spina bifida. Spina bifida is when the very lowest parts of your spinal cord don't completely roll up properly, and people are left with either a vertebrae that don't close completely, sometimes it's the meninges that don't close completely, and sometimes they end up with a lot of their spinal cord out on their back in what's called a myelocele. And it's a really bad deal. And as my clinical point to make, if you ever think about getting pregnant, start taking folic acid immediately. Don't wait till you find out you're pregnant, because you probably won't find out you're pregnant until the 6th or 8th week of pregnancy. And you want to be taking folic acid in the very first few weeks of pregnancy, because the folic acid is what really helps that brain roll around and form completely. So those diseases, which are awful, and I'll show you some pictures of them later, are prevented by taking folic acid. But once again, a lot of you women, you're happy once the doctor says, well, you're going to be a mama, you're pregnant, here, start taking your prenatal vitamins, right? And you do it, right? Well, I'm telling you, it's already too late for some of these problems. So if you're thinking about getting pregnant, you're deciding you might get pregnant, start taking your prenatal vitamins right then, especially the folic acid. Gosh. Why are you talking to us about that? Anyway, so here's those 3 parts of the brain. Please don't worry about them. Here's the 5. And then they divide it into 5 parts, which you can see here. And then we divide it for our class as 6 parts, right? And here they are: the cerebrum, diencephalon, mesencephalon, cerebellum and pons, and the medulla. So this is just kind of the way the brain forms. You see, this is what it looks like at 3 weeks, 6 weeks, and then later in life. obviously 6 weeks, it's already matured this far, and that's probably when you might be figuring out you might be pregnant. Make sense? The ventricles of the brain, let's talk about them. You need to understand the ventricles of the brain. We have some really nice models back there that illustrate the ventricles of the brain. A ventricle means it's a water-filled cavity within the brain. And obviously, the brain forms around it to form that water cavity in the middle. We call it the neurocoel. That just means it's in the brain and it's an open cavity, a Sloan. Neurocoel expands to form different chambers, the ventricles up through your cerebrums on either side, and then they merge and go down all the way down your spinal cord. The big, large lateral ventricles are out each side. The entire ventricle system, ventricular system, all the way down this central canal of the spinal cord, are lined by ependymal cells. Remember that word? Ependymal cells, they're the ones that form, they make the cerebrospinal fluid, they take care of the spinal fluid, and so forth. It's one of those things that you learned in chapter 12 that you think you could forget, but you can't. The two lateral ventricles on either side over here, they merge in the middle, separated by a tiny little membranous partition called the septum pellucidum. You'll see it on our models, and you'll see it in your brains. The lateral ventricles come together and form the third ventricle, which is in the midline. Now get this, once again, they call one of them the first ventricle and one of them the second ventricle. They come together in the middle, it's formed the third ventricle, and behind the third ventricle is the fourth ventricle. Go figure. And the right one is at number 1, and the left one is at number 1. They just number them that way. Okay, the lateral ventricles can communicate back to the third ventricle via the foramen of Monroe, the interventricular foramen, and then you get into the fourth ventricle, and the fourth ventricle goes as far back as the medulla, and it eventually goes all the way back and all the way down as the central canal of the spinal cord, which none of you remembered. I am so disappointed. There's a little cerebral aqueduct in the middle that connects the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle. I think I have some pictures here now to show you. So these are the lateral ventricles out here that go through the cerebrum on either side. They come together in the middle to form this interventricular foramen here that connects the two ventricles. This becomes the third ventricle here. Then there's a cerebral aqueduct illustrated right here, tiny little tube. It comes back here and opens up into this larger fourth ventricle. The fourth ventricle touches the cerebellum, the pons, the medulla. All of those guys back there are serviced by the fourth ventricle. And then going on back out of the fourth ventricle, it continues all the way down the spinal canal as the central canal. Just a little tube of water, basically, cerebrospinal fluid.